Hello, everyone. My name is Jeremy Horn, and I'm a graduate assistant at the University of Texas Center for Community Engagement. We would like to welcome everyone to the second event of our new series, Conversations from the Front Porch. As the Front Porch of the University of Texas at Austin, the Center for Community Engagement seeks to cultivate meaningful connections among residents, the community leaders, and other stakeholders in Austin's neighborhoods. So these conversations are meant to provide timely and candid conversations with community experts who provide context for Austin community priorities and to inform and inspire collaborative community efforts. Conversations from the Front Porch are a part of the University of Texas' ongoing efforts to cultivate meaningful connections with Austin community members and organizations. These conversations are inspired by our Front Porch gatherings, which are community town halls for resource and information sharing, and they seek to create space to amplify the voices of several community-based organizations that engage in similar topics of neighborhood advocacy and service. So through our shared but distinct challenges, our successes, and our imagined futures, we hope to enter important conversations about community collaboration and support while engaging in transformative practices. So over the next several conversations, we will highlight organizations and issues that are important to communities at the local, state, and national levels. Our previous conversations have discussed grant making, for example, and those can be found on our website. But today we'll be engaging in these conversations about community development. And to help us navigate that discussion, we have the Center for Community Engagement's honored leader, Stephanie Lang, to help moderate that conversation, along with Gregory Smith, the founder and CEO of Austin Revitalization Authority, and Tanya Debose, founder and preserving of Communities of Color, and executive director of the Independence Heights Redevelopment Council. So we just want to thank everybody for joining us today, and we look forward to a great conversation. And so with that, I'll pass it over to Stephanie Lang.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. And hello. Thank you both so much for joining us. I'm really excited about this. When we were kind of imagining what this could look like, you were the two folks that came to mind before we even had a subject, right? Just thinking about, the work that I witnessed you all do in your communities, and felt like this would be a wonderful conversation, especially the way in which you do similar work, but how this impacts the specific communities that you work with. So I'm not going to say much more than that, so we can get going. And I will start it off by having each of you introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about your organization. So I will start to my left with Ms. Debose.
Good morning, and thank you, Stephanie, for inviting me to be a part of this. My name is Tanya Debose, and as Jeremy stated, I am the executive director of the Independence Heights Redevelopment Council, also the founder of Preserving Communities of Color, where we believe that communities can be transformed into inclusive places as well as cultural destinations.
It's my turn? Okay, well, thank you. I first want to clarify, Jeremy, I'm not the founding president and CEO, but I am the president and CEO of the organization. So I wanted to clarify that. But I am, my name is Greg Smith. I'm the president and CEO of the Austin Revitalization Authority. To tell a little bit about me, I'm an Austinite, born and raised in East Austin. The organization that I represent has been in existence for, we're celebrating our 25th year with the organization. And we're a community development corporation where we own and operate approximately 65,000 square feet of office and retail space. And I'll stop there because we will cover many of those issues as we proceed.
All right, thank you both. So one of the things that has come up when even thinking about community development is like there's so many definitions, right, of it. And there's ways in which people who are community development based organizations kind of navigate this work differently. So I would love to hear kind of your personal definition, and as well like how your organization defines community development.
Sure. So for community development for me is really the type of development that sustains resident empowerment and equity. It is about developing a community where you're building social cohesion, but also holistically integrating planning, education, advocacy, supporting our residents, and really empowering them to really create the community that they deserve and one that they want. And that can be anywhere from historic preservation activities to revitalization activities. It just depends on where your neighborhood is, whether it's a food desert, a lack of good schooling and education, and all of that kind of goes into that definition of community development. And I'll say one last piece to this. Community development for me, when I started doing this work, my degree is in criminal justice, so it wasn't on my radar at all. Have no background in it. It's definitely a divine position that I was put in. And part of what I've had to learn is that there's no right way. There's no straight road to it. It is about hearing the people who are there, understanding what the needs are. And if the needs say we need to rebuild, revitalize our communities, then you do what you can in order to be able to bring, help them bring that forth, because there's no promise you're going to always be there. And so you've got to teach them actually how to do it and then empower them with the resources in order to be able to define and build a community that they envision.
I agree with Toya. She did a great description of that. And, if I speak about the Austin Revitalization Authority and how we came about, it was to lead the revitalization efforts of a blighted area or a business corridor area that we felt that needed some attention. And the council member and everyone recognized that a community development corporation would be best suited to carry out that mission. And I agree. It depends on the needs of the community, which determines the mission of those various CDCs, because it goes from affordable housing to historic preservation, education, job creation, economic development. And when we talk about preservation, some folks would think of historic preservation, but it's, preservation of affordable housing, preservation of the quality of life that the neighborhood exists in those years. So it's just a broad definition. When I think of community development, it's a grassroots effort. It's the community that's taking control. It's the buzzword of empowerment, but it's that grassroots effort. The community say, this is what I want. And so we got to organize to make those things happen.
Thinking about what you both said, especially Greg, around the priorities, how are the different issues, right, that are impacting your community? How do you all even, prioritize that? I would imagine there's so many things, right? There's so many challenges, and especially for the folks that are going to watch this, you are both working in historically Black communities. So,
sure.
Right. How do you kind of go about, what's this process for you kind of defining, okay, this is the focus right now. And I'm sure you have to pivot at times, Is that like?
So I'll take a stab at this one. Because I did not have that background in community development, I kind of started working with my pastor, who saw their role, the church's role, as being a part of the community beyond and outside the walls of the church. And in doing that, you get to see the needs of the community. But one of the things that helps you to really define the goals, the strategies, and really understand what the needs are is a community needs assessment. And so in that work, the first thing that we did a SWOT analysis: strengths, opportunities, weaknesses, and threats. We made a goal of 100 people we had to ask that question to. We then brought a group of people together and reported what our findings were. And then from that, we said, so what do y'all want to do next? To start to address and implement things that are going to help you get there. And so that end started a community planning session that consisted of 6 meetings over a 6-month period where we stretched the net wide and asked stakeholders, not just residents, but people who might have driven to this community for work and for church. And, they might have kids who go to the schools there. We asked everybody to come and tell us what they envision, for this community. And so what results out of that, Stephanie, is the first phase is from the assessment is that list of needs. So that becomes your needs assessment. And then what you do is then you start asking people and partners, how can you help us fulfill these needs that we see here? And what projects can we come up with in order to be able to implement, some strategies that actually came out of it? And so that's really the beginning of where you have community input. And as you heard both Greg and I say, this is really about what the community needs. We're just in a leadership position to really influence and voice to others what the people are saying they want. We're there to look at the best interest of what's for the community. And really in my hood, Greg, anybody that comes against that is the enemy. And so we make sure that they understand it at the beginning that our role is not to satisfy politicians and what their needs are. It's about those people who are here that I have to see every day, who don't have pipes, who don't have lights, who don't have food. Those are the people that we work for.
Yeah. Tanya's pretty good. I mean, I'm tired of going back behind her, but great. No, don't turn around. I love it. I really do love it. I love hearing it. And I tell you, in terms of priorities and stuff, we had a mission. Our mission is to encourage residential, commercial, and cultural development that promotes the community well-being while respecting the people, the institution, and the history of East Austin and other underserved communities. So when we can fall in terms of priority falling within that, I think my biggest priority, I have to kind of just go back a little bit. My biggest priority when I first started here really was to financially stabilize the organization. Okay, that was the priority, get it financially stable so that we can do some work. Now, once we got it financially stable and started generating revenue, obviously say, okay, we got some dollars we can put back in the community. Or we started looking at little niches. Folks will walk into my office and say the city has this program that's called Community Initiative that they need to access, but they don't have the accounting infrastructure, if you will, or to access those dollars. So all of a sudden, we found ourselves as a niche, as a physical sponsor for entities to access dollars from the city. Now, these dollars might be $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, but for our assistants, they would never access those. Now, what they doing in the community with those, they go put on little art shows or little events dealing from mental health or just various festivals in the community. So that was, you're talking about pivoting. So that's a niche that we have grown in the last 3 or 4 years. Another niche that we've come up with is our tax distressed properties. My board members kept coming to me and had this, we coined this phrase, folks that are land rich but knowledge poor. There's a lot of folks look like us that are land rich and knowledge poor. And I can tell you a couple of stories, just real quick, where there's one we're working on right now that we identified we went to our tax collector because we work in 78702, and we asked the tax collector, give us a list of the highest tax distressed properties in that zip code. We found 3 of them, and we found all 3 owners of them. And what we're doing right now is that we're working with them to try to preserve, they still have equity in their properties. And I'll give you this one quick example I'll give you is that They owe over $80,000 in taxes, over $40,000 in loans, but the property is worth about $500,000. However, the owners are knowledge, I said knowledge poor. They don't know what to do. So they actually have their head in the sand and just thinking it's just going to go away, when in reality, it's getting ready to be foreclosed on tax foreclosure steps. So what we've done is we've approached them, we stepped in, we say, we're going to stop this foreclosure. We're going to help you put this property up for sale. We're going to get it sold. We're going to make sure you pay off all of those debts right there for you. And then you can walk away. Now, when we do this is going to be a true story. I'm working on this. It's going to happen the next couple of months. These folks, there's 4 people. There's 3 kids and a mother. It's going to be split 4 ways. They're going to walk away with each of them going to walk away with $70,000 each. When before they were going to lose all of it. So that's, again, you're talking about community development and addressing the need and what the priorities are. We see, helping folks realize not losing the equity or their inheritance or a part of their estates. And really, we're putting some dollars in it, but we're getting our dollars back. And they say we're making money. No, we make 3% off of that. But more importantly is, these folks would have never thought that they were going to get these kind of dollars. Let me stop rambling. I'll let you go.
Stephanie, it's kind of hard to hear you right now.
Can you hear me now?
A little bit better. Still going in and out a little bit though.
Okay. Now.
Still about. Yeah, I can do that. I actually had a related question, if that's okay. So one thing I hear you guys both say is that community needs are your priority, and that comes first. And so I'm thinking about how sometimes the community needs can often conflict with maybe the needs of the city and those systems of governance, but also can conflict with even private investors coming from outside these communities. So I'm just wondering, when you meet those conflicts between the community needs and people who are not a part of the community, how do you wrestle with that, and how do you make sense of that tension?
I'm gonna have to. Stephanie knows this. I have to regroup and think about how to answer this in a professional manner. Because we got some hood styles, some that are ways that we handle it. But it is a great question, Jeremy. I want to kind of backtrack and then bring it forward. So one of the things that Greg talked about was that they walked in as an organization, and the need at the time was someone to serve as a fiscal sponsor. We came in and we didn't have any of what he talked about. We had people power. We were, the community that I'm in is the first Black city in the state of Texas. I'm a 5th generation descendant of people who started that community. And when we learned how they did it and we studied what they did, we knew what our oil and gas was in that community. And once we grasped that we came from good stock, and we embraced it, we started to instill it in the next generation and the next generation, because as the generations pass, if you don't tell your story and make sure that you own that narrative and you're filling those young people's heads up with what's there, it's going to be easier for people to come in and conquer you. They say leaders without a plan, you already gone, so the biggest thing is having a plan. And so when you started to see some of the families starting to lose property like Greg talked about, when you see families who grandma's gone and everybody else has a house outside the community, and so what do we do with this home, going forward? It's already kind of embedded in the community. And I'm just speaking to our community because every community is different, that you don't sell nothing. It is, like Greg said, your inheritance. Now, if you get to the point where you need to sell it, If you get to the point where you are behind in taxes, then give us a call so that we might help you brainstorm on strategies going forward. But the one thing, Jeremy, that we didn't know, and it's what Greg said, they started looking at an inventory of their highly, distressed tax properties. We didn't do that. I would see them, but we didn't know what to do about it. And to a certain extent, we still don't. And so what we were able to do from there is really start to talk to those families. And I don't know, Greg might attest to this, is that they had a lot of pride and they didn't want people to know that they didn't know what to do. So that education piece that Greg is talking about was absent because it's like, oh, we got it. My sister, cousin, niece that live in Chicago got it. My family's working on it. And then it took me some years to realize, no, you really don't have it because these taxes are steadily going up. So developers, as we saw the narrative change, Jeremy, the newspaper came out and say some of the best neighborhoods are the top 3 neighborhoods in Houston. If you're going to move here, our neighborhood came up as one of those top 3. So this was a marketing move by real estate developers to drive real estate investors to come in. So we never saw on the surface that there were some guys buying up our community, going in and getting those tax distressed properties. But what I did hear from some of our, I call them homegrown developers, buyers who are people from our community who started buying, we having a hard time, Tanya. We coming up against some guys that we ain't never seen before down at the auction. These things, we gonna need a little help. But when I went to get a permit, they telling me I had an alleyway and they can't abandon the alleyway, and then they stalled on my permit. So I'm starting to hear these little conversations going. And so as usual, I come with the backing of the church. And one thing you don't do in the Black community, you don't want to buck the church because they know 7 other pastors who know 7 other pastors who know the whole AME, the whole Kojic, so we can shut down a whole hotel. A whole hotel and a restaurant in one day with word of mouth. So they didn't want to come against that. And so it wasn't just Tanya, because I'm representing the interest of the people. And so we went down to the city and we said, we got to have a housing development plan because we don't have zoning. That's the difference. We don't have zoning. We needed a housing development plan. And so the only tools they offered, Jeremy, was historic preservation, all right, where you can get a district or you can get a home landmark. And the other tool that we had, what they started creating through policy, was minimum setback and lot size standards. And that takes going door to door. It takes organizing. You got to get everybody signed. You got to wait for it to go to city council. That's a lot of work when you don't have staff, you don't have money, but you got people power like we had. So it's all of those pieces. So when those developers started to come in, we pushed back. There's some things that I can't tell you that we did on this because UT wouldn't be able to play it, to be held up in the criminal court. But there are some things not authorized by our organization, but people were doing in order to push back, against developers who were coming in, but with no zoning, with no guidelines. We're kind of at a loss here other than using our people power to say, this is your inheritance, this is your great grandfather's legacy, this is the first Black city. How do we preserve that legacy that you have going forward? And if you have to sell it, if you have to leave it to somebody who your ancestor who first occupied it will be proud that you left it to. That's all we got. Now, I'm sure Greg's story is different, but that's all we have here in Independence Heights.
I don't like going behind her. Great story, but she does, and on point, Tanya, on point about trying to preserve that legacy and keep it within the family, because that was one of the things that we look at first. The first thing when I was talking about tax distress property, we look at first, see, how can we help them keep it? But that's the first thing. But at some point when we look at the full picture, we realize they can't. And there was another story I would tell you about another woman that was about to get foreclosed on, that she couldn't. And we stepped in and paid the mortgage off, assisted her in relocating to a senior housing development, and paid for that and paid for her rent in there, went and fixed her house up and to sell it for as much money as she can, put it on the market and we got a contract within 7 days. After we paid everybody off, including got our money back, that lady was able to walk away with over $100,000. Now, what I didn't tell you, it took me about 9 months to convince her that living in this house for 30 years, raising her only son, that she could no longer afford to live in that house and that she was gonna have to relocate to someplace else. That took 9 months to get her there and for her to trust me. So, you know, it's addressing the needs, but it's also that humanitarian piece in there that comes in. But get back to dealing with those, how do you deal with developers coming in? Houston is a little bit different because they don't have zoning, where we do have zoning. And we did have a plan. We have a plan in place. It was called the 11th and 12th Street Redevelopment Plan. And it laid out a zoning regulation, and it laid out design regulations, as well as uses in the area. So we did control it. Now, what happened in our situation is this plan was done in 1999. So that's 22 years ago. Is that right? Yeah, 22 years ago. And so the neighborhood has changed. And the vision 22 years ago is a whole lot different now. And so therein lies a big struggle. And here ARA started that, designed that plan 22 years ago. And we want to want to implement that. But you got a lot of folks who have moved into the neighborhood, different policy directors, you know, policy council members, and all of that has come into play. And so we're having that battle, internal political battle, if you will. Now, I think we have the community support, but there's other elements that are coming into play. But we can keep the developers in check in terms of they have to develop in accordance with the already established plan and with zoning requirements. But many times those developers, when they get track of the land, they always want more entitlement. They want it to be higher. They want more square footage than what the zoning requires. And then that's when the neighborhood can step up and speak in opposition of that. Generally speaking, our organization would be more supportive of the neighborhood's stance than the developer stance, because we want to support the plan that was adopted 22 years ago, that we bought in on and wrote it. And so as long as it's within that, that's what we're going to support, and we're supporting the neighborhood.
I want to quickly add one thing Greg triggered in my mind. One of the things that we did also is that for all those tax delinquent properties prior to 2005, right around the time of Hurricane Katrina, the pastors went to the city and basically asked for those properties. They felt like that was revenue that came in our community that we had lost, and that we wanted to be able to have those properties so that we could then develop a plan for future use of those properties. And that's where the Land Assemblage Redevelopment Authority happened in Houston. So it's called the Laura Board. So those properties went into a land bank, and then communities could go in with CDCs and actually get those properties for like $1 or something, develop them, and put them back into affordable housing. Another thing that we did was we had our own homegrown group of investors. They were called Astro Investors. The youngest one is 83 right now. Those guys got together, put their money together, because we were the first Black city. So our ancestors were used to working together. They had the first co-op. They bought shares at $50. I mean, this was back in 1905, okay? And so they came together at Booker T. Washington High School, pulled a company together. They bought all of those tax delinquent properties, moved houses that got flooded under Tropical Storm Allison to our community, and put families back in them. Most of them are old now. The sad thing is that the children don't want to even manage the property. And so trying to figure out what to do with it has been a big issue for us right now. But the end of just one ending point is when one of them was getting old and they were like, well, we don't want to manage it. You know, I got other things, health issues. They would sell it to one another until it ended up in the hands of one. And now that one is really old. And now we have a young African-American developer who's in the neighborhood and he's starting to sell it to him. And so that was one of the things that we did. You know, I don't believe in fighting a big bad machine that comes against you. You build a bigger and better one and make that one obsolete.
Yes. All right. Can y'all hear me better now? Okay, great. That was a wonderful question, and thank you all for so much insight around that. And I have about 1,000 questions in my head. I'm like, okay, no, we only have a certain amount of time. But that brought up all kind of things for me, and thinking about my history connected to Clarksville and my, grandfather selling that property when his parents passed, and how there's this piece of me like, oh, I wish we had kept that in our family, and but also knowing the reality of being a Black family that needed that money, right? And so how you navigate that, and of course, it's easy for me to say with the privileges that were afforded by those decisions that he made, but those are things that come up around even, educating these next kind of generations around this history. And that also kind of connects me to the next thing, the next question. It was around preservation, and I know that preservation is a huge part of what, both of you do in your organizations. So I wanted to talk about all the different ways preservation is important to this work. You want to have you start? Great. All right. We're pointing to you. You start.
All right. Okay. Well, I mean, I think I touched on preservation earlier. It's such a broad thing. It's more than just historic preservation. The preservation of wealth, which we was talking about in those families here. One of the experience, well, the other thing that we've done, I mentioned to you earlier before we got online, I referenced the Negro District here. When it was designated in 1999, that's just for, 1928, excuse me, the 1928 plan that designated this area for Black folks to get basic needs and services from the city, that they had to be located over in this area here. But one of the things that's taken place is that this area has also been designated as the African American Cultural Heritage District, which is at that time, it was the first urban cultural heritage district designation in the state of Texas. And so, yes, at the time in 2009, I believe is when it took place. And so we are really, pivoting on that. And as a result of that came the organization is called Six Square, that is promoting the district that way. But it just so is ironic that our office and our primary focus of the Austin Revitalization Authority, which started in 1996, we're considered as in the heart of that district there. So from our mission is to do historic preservation, preserve the quality of life. And one of the things I want to highlight in terms of preservation is I don't know if you guys know he was at one point the oldest veteran alive, which was Richard Overton. And our organization is working to create a museum of the Richard Overton house and preserve all of the items and things that still exist in that house. I just shared this real quick moment about a month ago. I walked through that house for the first time, and Rama was telling me no one has been in the house in 2 years since he passed. And the eerie feeling of it was right there, his chair that he sits and watches TV was the ashtray with still ashes and the cigarette and the cigar that he last smoked there, with a box of cigars still open in the same spot. So you're talking about preservation, that's, that I see. That's what I think of. Our historic houses we've done. My office building I live in. That I office in. It's 100. It was built in the 1940s. We preserved it and we made a 2-story addition to it. So it's a nice historic preservation. Another one is the Hano building, which is another historic preservation that we did, and got an award for that one. And we are looking at leasing that out to the office. Another initiative we're really moving forward with of late, and this is where the city council recently approved a $23 million program to fund rapid acquisition for affordable housing. And that's where we're looking at preserving, we're focusing in the Colony Park neighborhood. And may not, Stephanie, you do know Colony Park neighborhood. And in addition to the 200 acres that is about in the process of being developed by Catalyst, we're focusing in that area there to preserve affordable housing, because Colony Park and Lakeside are basically bookends, if you will, of the 200 acres. And once those 200 acres get developed, you potentially easily can have the have and the have-nots of those neighborhoods that was developed in the 70s. So we're going in there, we'll utilize some of this $23 million and to buy some of these houses that are coming online and preserve those as affordable housing, so we can create a mixed income. It'll be a mixed income neighborhood in that area.
Thank you.
All right. So I was just kind of thinking on that question about, historic preservation and the work that we're doing. And it is, I have to take it back to the people who came before me. They are the children of the founders of Independence Heights. And so the first wave of preservation happened around the 70s when they got the National Historic District, got recognized as a National Historic District. And that triggered a state marker. And then what they also did was they went in and looked at all those buildings, did a building survey, and they went in and then landmarked, got state and federal markers for the buildings of importance, sort of like what he's talking about, certain homes, things like that. So we were able to get those things landmarked. And then what they also did was created a book, a history book of our community, first churches, first government, all of that. And they created with Rice University a companion website that if people looked up Independence Heights, that site would come up, but it also was in a book. But they took it further and they gave all of the schools in the community the book, which that then it triggered education and telling our own story and making sure we own our own narrative, and that kids who are from this community that go here know going forward the history of this community. I didn't really know the history of the community until I turned 40 and started doing this work, just being honest. My mother never sat down and said, this community was the first Black city in the state of Texas. But as I started doing this work and realized, just like Greg said, they sat him down, said, you'll be here a couple of months, a couple of years. Did the same thing to me, told me 2 years. That was back in 2005, okay? I'm still here today. So we both been bamboozled, okay? And so one of the things that I was able to, think about is we started turning the wheels toward revitalization. The elders were passing on, they were getting older, they were passing the baton. My pastor always said to me, I don't care what you think you want to do until you go ask the person who started the party if this is okay and this is what you want. It's not going to work. You got to go back to the elders and get approval and get some sense of where they were going with this, because you got to know your history in order to move forward with the future. So that was one of the things that I'm proud of that they instilled in me. And then moving forward, they handed me the baton because they felt like they could trust me. I went and I said, we can't do nothing until we honor these elders. So we did a dinner called Living Legacies, and we honored everybody that was 100, that were 90 and older. Then we went to 80 and older. Then we went to 70 and older, year by year by year. Once we did that, they felt good, and they started organizing themselves and really feeling the proudness that had kind of dissipated. And they started instilling in the next generation, look, baby, this house got to stay here, you know, that type of thing. The other thing that we did was, and this was just around about 2012, we started honoring families called legacy families. And with the Legacy Families program, if your family, if you can trace your roots back to the early beginnings of this community, we're giving you a certificate and a plaque. They did it with all 300. Why we can't do it with our own Black community, you know? And so we wanted them to feel proud that they had become a part of this place that was the first African-American municipality in Texas. And so we then started looking at the 1920 census, which is the only census that lists Independence Heights as an independent city in the county of Harris County. And we looked at all those families, and I said, who can trace their family back to this? That means you're a part of the first families. And so now we're creating signs that if you still have your house, because we're making it proud to own, proud to be a part of this legacy and this heritage, it's going to go in front of your house. And we started landmarking houses who could trace back to the first families. And then also we did we did more historic districts, more local, because federal districts aren't protected. They are coming in and just raising everything. Developers come in, and they just pull up the house, even though you got it landmarked at the federal level. So we started doing more local landmarks. And then also here recently, we started doing oral histories with COVID. We realized, okay, people are leaving here. We need to get these stories, on tape. And so we started doing oral histories using Zoom like we're doing today, getting people on and doing oral histories, because now we have, this digital collection of stories that, now we're able to really write and tell this history. So those are just some of the ways that we have integrated historic preservation in the work that we're doing to revitalize the community. And we also were able to turn in, like he said, a set of design guidelines that coincide with our local historic districts. That way, anybody who buys a home in that particular district, you have to follow these design guidelines, which are pretty much going to stick with the compatible architectural design of the time.
Yes, thank you for that. And it's actually making me think of another thing that's really important that you both spoke of in different ways is this loss, right, of this legacy. As people are displaced and gentrification is happening, we're losing these stories. And so, in my own efforts to kind of hold on to these stories and do research, because kind of understanding the past, obviously speaks to the future. So my next question is around that, of the organizations and the communities that I have studied who have maintained in some ways, had done a really good job of kind of looking to the future, kind of seeing the writing on the wall, seeing the direction that, the things that were putting their community at risk. And so they kind of implemented that. So thinking about that in your own organizations, what does this future look like for your communities? And what are kind of your plans to, grow that, to implement things to protect that future, what have you?
Okay, I'll go. Well, some folks would say that revitalization is a double-edged sword. Because when you fix things up and make new, other folks don't want to be part of the new stuff. So there's a natural property values going up and gentrification is taking place. And I would tell you, I'm a realist, and I know my focus is the 11th and 12th Street corridor. And we do have a footprint here, and we're generating sufficient revenue. And we're benefiting from that gentrification. Let me just say that. But then I'm starting to take the Robin Hood theory and say, I make my funds here and I invest it in other underserved communities as part of my mission. And so when I say that is we're looking at other areas to carry out our mission, to do affordable housing. As I mentioned to you earlier, we're looking at the Colony Park Lakeside neighborhood and looking at developing affordable housing there and looking at buying land. We just recently had an opportunity to acquire property in the St. John's neighborhood and looking at developing affordable homeownership housing there. So if you talk about our horizon, I mentioned to you about the $23 million that the city just created this program for rapid acquisition for affordable housing. We are implementing programs in those particular neighborhoods. And if you know St. John's and if you know Colony Park, those are I would consider underserved communities there that are lacking. Some need mixed income housing and some need just affordable housing. And so we're looking at, that's our horizon, in addition to finishing up what we started here on 11th Street with our mixed use development. There's still 2 blocks here on East 11th Street that we continue to look at opportunities to create a mixed income development that will work for all the organizations that want to be on this portal.
Great. Good stuff.
So I would add all of the above, except we're not to that stage. We still in elementary school on on the land. And so a couple of things that we're working on and what the future of our community looks like is, one, is stabilizing the land, the cost as well as ownership. And so one of the things that we're working on is the Independence Heights Community Land Trust, where these properties that we are able to acquire will go into a land trust, and people will own the home that's on it, but we will continue to control the land, which keeps the taxing down. So that's one. The other thing that we're working on too is to really make our neighborhood more inclusive. And inclusion means that this should be a neighborhood where everyone can feel at home, whether you're the fireman, you're the teacher, the pastor, or you're someone who owns a Fortune 500 company. Our neighborhood shouldn't be these exclusive enclaves that are just there for the well-to-do to build their own utopia. And so we're making sure that a model that we implement is inclusion. And so affordable housing, mixed income development, all of that to be able to attract the right mix of people and neighborhood services to, our community. And then at the end of the day, it's the mission and why I started the Preserving Communities of Color initiative, because one of the things that Black communities that were simply just African American, were created that way out of racism. We were redlined to certain areas, or we were relegated to certain sections in a city. And so that America, we hope, is over. And so we have to embrace a new future. And that new future includes people that don't look like us on this recording. And so in doing that, listening to people of what else we can have in our community, but never forgetting who we are, making sure we take care of the existing residents that are here, and honoring our past. And so that means bringing forth that community as a cultural destination. So economic development to us, where Greg is talking about, helping and building and generating income through outside the community by, building this revenue stream. Ours is to look at our history still is our oil and gas, creating this Main Street program, because we do have an original Main Street in our community. We started back doing these North Main Street markets where we're showing that if you build it, they will come. And so now guys are pulling up their barbecue pits and, you know, they're selling out within 2 and 3 hours because there's money to be spent in a neighborhood. All of it was going out. We have to stop that door and bring it back. And so we're also looking at other economic development pieces that I can't really talk about now because I don't want to jinx them, but looking at that too. But cultural heritage tourism is a big one. And with the establishment of the new Emancipation National Historic Trail, which Independence Heights is a part of it, if you look at the dollars that comes into the state of Texas on heritage tourism, it's in the billions. And Black communities have not gotten their fair share of that money. And so one of the things that we're focused on is how do we get our fair share of that money and use our history, being the first Black city in the state of Texas, still having our churches, still having our city halls, still having our historic schools and historic homes, creating a walking map and an app where people can come and visit stores, t-shirts, coffee mugs, eating places authentic to our culture. And that's when you become this cultural destination, that people can experience your culture, not by a sign that say this was here, but this authentic environment that still exists. We deserve to preserve it.
Yes.
I love this. I love this. And I specifically like how you're talking about checking in with the ancestors, checking in with the past as you move forward in the future. And in that sense, I think it's important to acknowledge that it's not just historical, but it's like this is part of our living present. You know what I mean? And so that's really powerful work. And so thank you guys for sharing. We have one more question, and it's about moving forward especially, but how can community members engage in this work on a day-to-day basis? So a lot of the things that you guys described are more of the macro level, bigger projects type of things. But for everyday community members who wanted to engage in preservation work, who wanted to engage in development work, what advice would you give them for engaging in that work?
You know, I got something fresh on my mind that just happened 4 days ago. So we got a new row of houses across the street from our city, from our neighborhood park, called the Big Park. Got the little park and the big park. We don't give no addresses. You just got to know where it's at. And the big park is where everything happens at. Festivals, swimming pool, tennis courts, community garden. Community garden overgrown because nobody's been out there since the pandemic. So we go over there and we're cleaning the community garden. The little guys, the new guys that live across the street, one comes over and he says, "Hey, can I help y'all shovel this mulch into this garden?" The other one sits in his house with his camera and his fence up this high, watching us, comes out the next day and goes, "Well, when y'all gonna move all this mulch and dirt from in front of the street?" I can't tell you what I said, but just know that opportunities for people, new, young, old, white, Black, Puerto Rican, to get involved in this work is there. The on-ramp for them to get on board with this work is to respect the history and the people that are there. Bring your ideas to that table. Don't come in the community and set up a table from the outside. That's a no-no. That's so disrespectful. And so when we have our community meetings every second Tuesday at 6:30, be at that meeting, be present. Don't go try to create your own meeting and use those colonistic ways to come in and actually start to raise up your own neighborhood in a place that already has a plan, that already has an existence. And so having those community meetings open and available to the community is the way that people can get involved in this work. And the last thing that I'll say, I was trying to figure out how to get people like my 30-year-old daughter and my son engaged in this work. And I looked at all these food trucks and the food this and the food that, and I said, okay, I'm gonna work with them. And so with this North Main Street project that we started, I was like, that's y'all, baby. I want y'all to get y'all friends. Y'all can set up this market. I'm gonna give y'all $5,000 for y'all to start with. Y'all do goodwill. Make sure y'all have some more money. They took it and they ran with it. Because my goal there is, I'm not gonna be here forever. So we have to pass this on, not just the history on the book, but we have to pass on what Greg and I are doing right now to the next generation so that when they are faced with it by themselves, they can say, well, what did mom and them do? You know, that piece left, Greg, when they took the bullhorns from us riding around the neighborhood saying vote, reminder to vote today. Remember, they canceled that law because it was working. So all that, they stopped sharing with us how they organized, how they did things in community. And so we had to figure out where did the disconnect happen and how do we get that back? And so you create on-ramps for both the newcomers that are coming. You send out a welcome pack and say, welcome to the neighborhood. You're in the first Black city in the state of Texas. Miss B's cookies are down the street if you want to taste some tea cakes. That's how we handle it. And the young people who had kind of started getting disconnected, we went into the schools. Friday, we're speaking. They had their own African American Studies program at Booker T. Washington. They didn't wait on HISD to do it. They have their own, and we speak there. And then bringing those young people on and giving them something that works for them, speaking their language.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I tell you, I don't like going behind her. But one of the things that we run into, you know, our office is open for anybody that wants to get involved with community development. Matter of fact, our office, we actually assist organizations to set up CDC or to set up their 501c3, help them put their application together to apply for that. I'm not going to, sometimes I'll even help fund those application fees. Because our job is really just trying to build that capacity with any and all organization that wants to get organized. That's that little niche, you know, that's a community need. And what we're finding out when we're doing our fiscal sponsors is that the reason why they needed fiscal sponsors is because they hadn't applied for their 501c3 designation. And so we find that some are organized and eager to do it, but there's others, they're a little nervous about jumping out there and getting in, dealing with the IRS type stuff. So, but our challenge in getting folks involved, I got to speak to my board. I know Tanya has this problem. Troy has this problem. Is you know, my board members are aging. I think my youngest, let me clarify this. Up until this January, my youngest board member, I probably, out of the 13, I may have had 2 of them that was less than 50. But the majority of them were over 70. And they've been with the organization for a long time. But I agree with Toya about you need to bring these young folks up that have that energy and have them work collaborative with you versus doing something independent of them. Because as she was speaking, it makes me think of you've heard the syndrome, the crabs in the bucket. I don't know if you've heard the crab in the bucket syndrome, where whenever someone's trying to get ahead, then they're trying to get out of the bucket, then another one at the bottom grab you and bring you right back down. And then you fight amongst yourself, and there's no progression that's made in a very strategic way. Because once you start fighting amongst yourself, then all the folks that you need support from, they're gonna say they can't decide amongst themselves what they want. So why should we be involved with that type of infighting, if you will? But for folks to get involved, there is a big commitment. As Tanya said, attending those meetings, those neighborhood meetings on a regular basis and getting involved. And sometimes it requires going to council meetings and making your voice heard. And it takes unique individuals that want to do that. And what I'm finding, a lot of your ones you're going to get are graduate students that's looking for some experience in doing community development work is where you're getting it. But anyway, I'll stop right
there. Yeah, that's you know, what you all just shared, everything you shared, and obviously thinking about this last part, the role that, you know, for me personally and for Jeremy and the work that we do, that was really insightful, thinking about not only bringing in folks, right, from other generations, but really utilizing what they bring to the table, around, like when you were saying, kind of with the food trucks, and you're talking about like graduate students and different folks. Because I know sometimes we can get stuck in our ways and think there's only this one way to do everything, but as times, change, we kind of have to pivot in that. So that's a good reminder for me as well. So thank you all for this whole conversation. I mean, I think we could have added a couple hours to it. There's so much to cover, but your work is inspiring, and I know this is going to be very helpful to a lot of folks. So thank you. Jeremy, did you have anything you wanted to say?
I didn't. I think this was really rich, and just want to thank you guys for coming out. Also, these conversations are going to continue to happen. Our next one is with Virginia Brown, who's an assistant professor at the Department of Population Health here at UT. So if y'all can attend that, please do come out and support. But thank you guys very much. Really insightful.
Thank you.